right, so here's hoping that some of you guys get the message and come and join me over at Google Hangouts on Air. We've had some technical difficulties tonight with the webinar platform. It doesn't seem to want to let me get access or get me in. So I've got a couple of minutes here before 8:30 when we're going to start officially. So yeah, I will keep an eye out for some of you. Hopefully you get the messages in your email. Why don't I post this to Facebook while we're at it, hey? Great to see somebody's joined me. Got the note that this webinar has moved, obviously. So we've got a couple of minutes here till 8:30, at which point I'll get going. I'm just trying to get the message out to a few other people that had registered for this, that we had to change platforms suddenly due to a somewhat unfortunate problem with the webinar software. So just hang tight and we will hopefully be up and running soon. And if you want, oh, I see that it's Dana has joined us, so that's great. Found his way over. And let's see if I can. All right. So we got a few more minutes here before people are going to come looking for this webinar. So we're going to just hang tight for a couple of minutes. Apologies again for the unfortunate change of venue last minute like this. What can you do, right? All right. All right, so it is 8:30, so we're going to just go ahead and get rolling here. Again, apologies for the change in venue. It happened suddenly tonight as I logged into the webinar platform, and as you might expect as a new software, it's got some glitches, and it actually said that this webinar had passed already and wouldn't let me in to fire up the broadcast. So it is what it is. We're going to go ahead and roll with this, and we'll probably hopefully have a few people join us. People seem to have gotten the message on their email, and they're starting to come online. So hello, my name's Jeff Coulard, and I'm really here because I really love helping people change. It's a bit of a mission in my life. And you can find me right off the bat here on Twitter at Jeff Coulard. You can email me, jeff@thesugarfix.ca. There'll be a bit more about me coming up. I've been working with addicts for the last 10 years with a wilderness-based addictions treatment center located just outside of Calgary with Enviro's Wilderness School. So that's given me a lot of kind of hands-on experience with young people and families who are going through pretty profound changes, looking at some pretty entrenched addiction issues. So lots of my work kind of flows out of that. I was diagnosed with diabetes a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I also drive a truck on vegetable oil, which isn't necessarily related to this topic, but it is interesting. People like to hear about that. So that's a little bit about me. And the most important thing that you need to know is that I'm a father, 2 amazing little people, young boy and a young girl, and I'm husband to a very incredible woman. So on top of all the other things that I do, that's by far the most important thing. So lots of my work. What to expect today? I was diagnosed with diabetes a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I also drive a truck on vegetable oil. Hi, Brema. I'm going to do this topic, but it is interesting. So that's a little bit about me off here. And the most important thing that you need to know is that I'm a father, 2 amazing little people, a young boy and a young girl, and I'm husband to a very incredible woman. So on top of all the other. Right, sorry, I'm getting distracted here by Prema, who just logged in. She obviously got the message. Lots of work. The interesting thing about Google Hangouts is that there's a bit of a lag, a delay between me talking and it showing up on your screen. So I'm going to ignore people as they log in here, and then I'm going to try and stay focused and stay in tune on the webinar. So a little bit of what to expect today. Focusing on the 3 things that you have to do to set yourself up for successful lifestyle change. So looking at those things that you should be doing before you embark on a journey of change. Specifically these 3 topics. Why information doesn't actually help you very much, why it doesn't matter, why the problem usually isn't the problem, and why goal setting doesn't work, and what you can do instead of goal setting. So let's get rolling on this. So let's start with information doesn't matter. So what do I mean by information doesn't matter? Well, you might be pretty in tune with this if you've ever gone looking for information, but there's so much of it out there, and so much of it is opposite, so polar opposite of what we would normally expect to find. You know, gone are the days of going to the library and looking up 1 or 2 resources. You punch something into the internet, and it's, as this saying goes, it's like taking a drink from a fire hydrant. There's just so much information out there, so it's tough to know what's true and what's accurate. Especially with diet and exercise and some of these other things that people are trying to change. So we'll talk a bit about that. You know, I did a quick Google search of, low carb diet, and I got 23 million hits on that. Obviously, you're not going to search through 23 million hits. You're going to look at the top 10 that are on your Google. And how do you know that those top 10 are actually that accurate? Or they, the company that's bought the most ad space is getting the most hits for whatever reason. So we're in a bit of a problem right now with information overload. We've got so much of it that we don't necessarily know what's accurate anymore. And at the end of the day, it actually doesn't matter very much, like I was saying. We know that smoking is bad for us. We know we shouldn't eat crappy processed food. We know we should exercise more, sleep better, and work less. At a certain point, having more information doesn't actually help us change anything. It just keeps us kind of stuck in this place of knowing we need to change, hearing that we need to change, but not knowing how to go about change. So let's talk a little bit about the stages of change. So this is a model by these 2 guys, Prochaska and DiClemente, that's used a lot in addictions research or addictions mental health fields to talk with people about change and to understand change a little bit more. So we'll walk through the model a little bit, and I'm going to help you hopefully with the planning portion. That's where we're going to spend most of our time tonight. So this idea of pre-contemplation is this place of not really thinking about change or having completely rejected change. So you might know that smoking's bad for you, but you've decided for whatever reason that you're going to keep smoking regardless. That's pre-contemplative. You're not really thinking about change. But lots of us find ourselves in this place of contemplation, of this kind of thinking and talking about change and looking for support. And this is that kind of place of ambivalence. We know that there are reasons to change, but there's also reasons that are holding us in our patterns of whatever that might be. Lots of us jump from this place of contemplation straight to action. So we think about a change, we start talking about change, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves at the gym, 6 in the morning, New Year's resolution style, straight into action. We don't put a lot of effort into strategizing how to move out of these old patterns. And so that's what we're going to spend some time on today. The planning phase leads into the action phase, where you're actually putting the plan into practice and you're gradually kind of moving yourself in the direction you want. And then hopefully we get into this place of maintenance, where we've achieved our developments, whatever we wanted to fix or change in our life, and we stay there. And this cycle is like addiction, pretty prone with relapse. So oftentimes we'll find ourselves falling into old patterns and behaviors. And with this model, ideally, relapses are things that we learn from. We get some insights and we get some knowledge, leading to less frequency in setbacks. So assuming you know what you'd like to change, the question is, if after a certain point of information doesn't help, what does help? If just reading more articles and watching more videos and getting more information doesn't actually help you change the behavior, what does help? And so the first thing that I'm going to introduce to you is one of the steps is this idea of mindfulness. And mindfulness, as described by this fellow Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's a kind of a leading thinker for many years in this area of mindfulness, says that it's paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, as if your life depended on it. So that's a pretty succinct definition. We're going to talk a little bit more about mindfulness and what it's not specifically. So mindfulness is not thinking, these thoughts that pop into our head. That's not necessarily mindfulness. Reflecting, it's not sitting at the end of the day with your journal and looking back on your day to see how you did with your goals, although reflection can be mindfully done. It's not goal setting and it's not planning. Mindfulness really is grounded in this present moment idea of where am I right now, what's going on, what are my thoughts, but not thinking your thoughts, but just being aware of your thoughts. So it's this awareness of what's going on. And it's actually critical to the change process, which we'll talk about. Because the only moment you can actually change your behaviors is this moment right here. Not the moment that's coming in an hour, and not the moment that just went past. We can reflect on the moments that have passed, and that's that reflection piece, and we can think, oh, I wish I would have done something different. I wish I wouldn't have grabbed that last donut out of the box, or I wish I wouldn't have swung by and bought the donuts in the first place. We can reflect on that. But that's not mindfulness, and we can't actually do anything about it other than plan for the future, And if we plan for the future, that's not the present moment either, and you can't actually change what's coming. You can forecast and you can predict and you can set goals and all that, but the only moment that you can actually do anything about your behavior is the one that you're currently in. So being able to establish a mindfulness habit around that is pretty crucially important. And you can only change things that you're aware of. And so, if the donuts is the thing that you grab, you have to be aware of that, and you have to be aware of what's driving you towards the donuts. Or if not exercising because you're stressed out or whatever it happens to be, if you're not aware of it and you're not aware of why it's happening, then you're not actually going to be able to change it when it pops up in that moment. So that's one of the benefits of reflection, and we'll do a reflection exercise here in a little bit on how you can figure out what's driving behavior. But really, awareness trumps information when you move out of that contemplation phase. So contemplation is great. You get to gather information about why you might want to change. But when you start to think about planning and acting on change, you need to develop a mindfulness habit. So the action that I'm going to suggest that everyone does is really develop a daily mindfulness habit on what you want to change. And so that might be around eating, it might be around exercise, it might be around stress or sleep or any of those things. And a mindfulness habit, it can be pretty simple. So a couple of examples of things that I do that I've been working on. One of them is a gratefulness habit. I realized that I was going through my day not necessarily in tune with all the wonderful things that were happening, and so I decided that every day I would find something to be grateful for. And I do that particularly when I'm out on a walk with my dogs, and we're walking along the creek, and I spend a few minutes just being grateful, and that's really helped with being a bit more mindful of all the wonderful things that I do have in my life. There are other exercises you can do, from formal practices like yoga and meditation to more informal practices, like I said, like a daily gratefulness habit, or just breathing exercises and body scans, just being in touch with where you are and what's happening. And so I highly suggest that you take a look at establishing some sort of mindfulness habit. So again, Mindfulness, paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, as if your life depended on it. And that's Jon Kabat-Zinn. And I'd highly recommend you check out his book, Wherever You Go, There You Are. He's got a few other great reads, but that one's a great introduction to this idea of mindfulness. So let's move on a little bit to problem solving and why the problem really usually isn't the problem. And for this, I'd like to introduce you to an exercise in a little bit called the 5 Whys to Deep Understanding. The one thing that really gets in the way of change is that often people look at a problem and they don't realize that it's actually usually a symptom of another problem. So let's take myself and the diabetes diagnosis. A lot of people would consider that a problem and treat that problem with insulin. That's the standard protocol for diabetes. Except that diabetes in and of itself is just a symptom of something else deeper inside of me that's going wrong. And it turns out that that issue actually had nothing to do with my diet. So I'm going to email you guys a copy of this worksheet, but it's called the 5 Whys to Deep Understanding. And essentially, it's an exercise that you can do to really drill down from what might be a symptom that's showing up in your life to what's an underlying problem. And so the 5 Whys to Deep Understanding was actually popularized by Toyota Motors when they were trying to dig into their factory mishaps or recalls with cars, and they would ask themselves, why is this a problem? And then when they'd figure out what the answer to that problem was, and they'd ask why again. And it's a process, and by the time you get down to that kind of 5th why, you have a pretty robust understanding of what all the contributing factors are to your problem. So I took the idea of diabetes with myself. So problem 1, that surface layer problem is diabetes. It's high blood sugar. So if I ask myself, why do I have diabetes, or why do I have high blood sugar? An easy answer to that is I'm eating too much sugar, or I'm eating too many simple carbohydrates. And so I have to ask myself, well, why am I eating so much sugar? And it turns out that I tend to eat when I'm stressed out. And so I'm one of those people that, I was writing my thesis and working full time and doing a bunch of stuff, and I ended up with my head in the cupboard or my head in the ice cream bucket a ton because I was stressed out, and eating was a way that I could cope with that stress. So it turns out that I was eating lots of sugar because I was stressed. When you ask why again, it leads us to this idea of too much stress in my life, a poor work-life balance, taking on too many things, and juggling too many things was what was causing that stress. And so by the time I got down to that kind of problem number 5, I'm a lot closer to the root cause of diabetes, which turns out has nothing to do with diet and has everything to do with juggling too many things and too much stress in my life. The benefits of this exercise is that it gives you multiple points of intervention. And so if we look at problem 5, juggling too many things, an easy way, or a way to cope with that, would be to learn how to say no. I could say no to some projects in my life. I could say no to some extra work. I could say no to doing my master's. I could get better at doing that, and we'll see how that goes. I've been working on that. Problem number 4, I could have better coping mechanisms. I could eat less when I'm stressed, or I could do push-ups, or I could do anything. Eating when stressed, I could eat broccoli. I don't have to eat sugar. And so you can see how an exercise like this gives you a much bigger picture and understanding of what the problem is. So I encourage you, once you get the worksheet from me, to check that out. And if there's a takeaway from this little section of the webinar, is that the problem is not the problem. It's a symptom of the problem. And it would be a great idea to kind of dig into that problem to figure out how to solve it. Let's get into goal setting and why it doesn't work and how you can do it better. So I particularly like this quote from a fellow named Seth Godin, who says, "Your audacious life goals are fabulous. We're proud of you for having them. But it's possible that those goals are designed to distract you from the thing that's really frightening you, the shift in daily habits that would mean a reinvention of how you see yourself." And there's quite a bit tied up into this quote, and we're going to unpack a little bit of it. But this idea that goal setting is a very challenging exercise to get right. And we're going to talk about a little bit of how goals go wrong, and then we're going to talk about how we can do it better. But first, let's talk a little bit about places that you can set goals in your life. There's 3 different kind of layers of goal setting. So we can set goals about our appearance, and that would be how the world perceives us. So it might be how we look, it might be wealth and status that we have, things that are kind of outward. We can set goals around the actions that we take, around our performance. And we can also set goals around our identity, the people that we believe we are. It turns out that setting identity-based goals are by far the most powerful way to actually change anything. And so a quick, easy example of this, I've been experimenting with identity-based goals and all these different layers for a while. And a while ago, about 6 months ago, I told myself that I was the type of person that always took the stairs at work. We're only up a few flights of stairs, and I was said, I'm not going to take the elevator anymore, but I'm the type of person, identity-based goal to take the stairs. And it's been 6 months, and every time I see the elevator, it's a trigger for me to go take the stairs. And I haven't taken the elevator since. And so when you believe something to your core about who you are, much more powerful. So let's talk a little bit about goals. They're really quite tricky to get right. On the one hand, we need a vision. We need a roadmap, something that drives us to action. But focusing too intently on them can actually backfire. So in the first way that goals can backfire is that they can reduce our current level of happiness. Whenever we're working toward a goal, we're telling ourselves that we're not good enough yet. But as soon as I reach my goal, I'll be better. And the problem with this is that you're teaching yourself to always put off happiness and success until that milestone is achieved. Once I run that marathon, I'll be happy. Once I make $1 million, I'll be successful. And what goes back to that initial step of asking people to develop a mindfulness habit is that when we're really goal focused and really externally oriented towards achieving these goals, we tend to actually just cruise through the present moment, always forecasting and thinking about what's coming up. And so it's really can be detrimental, like I said, to the current level of happiness. So that's the one way that goals go wrong. Goals can actually really be at odds with long-term progress and this idea of goal yo-yoing. And so I know lots of people that set really ambitious goals in their life. And so they'll set a goal to run a marathon, and they'll train for 6 months really diligently, and they'll reach that milestone, they'll run the marathon, and then they'll completely fall off the exercise bandwagon, and they'll gain 20 pounds, and then they'll set themselves a new goal. And it might be to climb a big mountain somewhere in Asia or South America, and they'll train really diligently for that, and they'll do it, and then they fall off the wagon again. So a lot of people bounce between big goals, and that can be really at odds with long-term progress. If your goal is long-term health and wellness, that kind of yo-yo effect can be detrimental. And finally, goals suggest that you can control things that oftentimes we actually don't have much control over. So every time we set a goal, we're trying to predict the future. We're trying to predict where we'll be at, and how long it'll take us to get there. And we live in a pretty chaotic world, and lots of things can happen. And so if we're really fixated on a goal that's external to us, that we have little control over, we can be setting ourselves up for long-term failure. And none of this is obviously to say that goals are useless. Goals are great for planning, and they're great for having that roadmap, and they're great for having a vision. Oftentimes, though, goals aren't great for making progress. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So how to do goals better. There's 3 ways that we can work on to really make goals more achievable. So it's great to set a big goal, but then we need to figure out the process that it's going to take to get us there. And so it might be that we want to run marathons, and we establish a process to get there. And when you focus on your process instead of your performance, so just going for the run as opposed to how fast and how many miles you ran, you can enjoy the present moment, you can be mindfully present, and you can improve your performance at the same time. So a quick example of this commitment to process is Team Sky, the British cycling team, and the Tour de France. In about 2010, they got a new head coach who said, we're going to focus solely on 1% gains in a wide range of areas. And so they look to shave 1% of weight off the bikes and improve posture 1% and improve their nutrition 1%. And they did this as a team. And I believe it's in 2012 they won the Tour de France, and again in 2013, and they picked up a whole bunch of gold medals at the Olympics recently. And so they really focused on that process of improvement as opposed to some distant goal, and it paid off wonderfully. The next step of doing goals better is to give up the immediate results. Once you've developed a process, that becomes your goal, and you give up the need to lose the 20 pounds immediately or to run your marathon right off the couch. So your goal becomes sticking with the process. And so I recently tried to implement this in my own life and decided that I was going to run 10 miles a week, and that was going to be my process. And for 4 or 5 months now, I've been running 10 miles a week, and I've given up this immediate need to run a marathon or do anything long distance running of any kind, just sticking with the 10 miles a week. And I've noticed huge gains in my fitness and mental health for sure. And then something that we do exceptionally poorly, I think, or at least I do, is building systems to support what we want to do. And so building these feedback loops so that when we're trying to change, we're actually tracking our progress. The old management saying is that you manage what you measure. A great example of this is the LA Lakers in the late 1980s, with the coach Pat Riley came in and established this idea of a career best effort, where they measured all kinds of different things, about the basketball player's performance, and crunched it all down to one number, and that became their career best effort. And their goal season after season was to increase their career best effort, each player incrementally, using this feedback. And they had systems for the team to get feedback. They could compare year to year and month to month, and they ended up winning a bunch of NBA championships. So simply managing what you measure actually accelerates your improvement. All right, let's move on to the 3 R's of habit changing. So when we're looking at actual habit change, this is that place where we need to be mindful. Hopefully we develop the mindfulness habit around what it is we're trying to change. And one of those pieces of mindfulness that is great to establish is developing a trigger of some kind, or a reminder that we want to do something differently. And so an example of this might be, or something that I've used, is that I wanted to be more physically active. And so I decided that I needed to do more push-ups and squats, because those are pretty effective, quick exercises. And so I developed a system where every time I went to do dishes, which happens pretty reliably actually about this time of night, that would be my trigger to do some push-ups. So I established a reminder. The routine, the behavior itself, was 10 push-ups, and the reward was a little, woohoo, all right, I just did 10 push-ups. But it's actually a really simple and really effective way to put new habits into your life. Without a reminder, without a trigger that happens with regularity, it just becomes one of those things that you plan on doing later that day. But if you establish a trigger that you do every single day regardless, then you've got something to build off of. And when we're deciding on what and how we want to change, it's important to keep in mind how easy the effort that's involved in this new habit and how much motivation it requires. So as this little picture demonstrates, is that on the left-hand side we have motivation, low on the bottom, high on the top. And on the bottom axis there, we've got effort, hard to easy. And so you can see if you've got something that's hard and you've got low motivation, the chances of you actually doing it are pretty much non-existent. Whereas if that same activity was broken down into smaller pieces and it was easier, that same level of low motivation would result in you actually doing the behavior. So the 10 push-ups for me every time I do the dishes, significantly easier than going to the gym at 6 in the morning, which would be similar activity, getting some exercise, but the motivation required was really, really high. So something to keep in mind when we're looking at habit change is picking as easy as possible that requires as little motivation as required. These are also known as tiny habit changes, and they're pretty easy to create. Simply a statement that says, after I whatever, I'll do the new habit. So after I turn the tap on to do the dishes, I'll do 10 push-ups. That's really as easy as it is. And if you find yourself not able to do that, if you find yourself setting that and then just a week later not having done any push-ups, it means that 10 push-ups is too hard. And maybe you need to do 1 push-up or 2 push-ups, or maybe no push-ups and you need to do a squat. But if you've got a reliable trigger and you've got something that you want to change, the job is to break that down to its smallest possible component. And I'll send you guys a worksheet as well on this, the 4 steps to tiny habit change. It's pretty straightforward, but I find that it's nice to have something to work off of every now and then. So in review, we've kind of cruised through this this stuff, but yeah, that's okay. In review, the first step is really to develop a mindfulness habit. So to look at that in-the-moment awareness of what's going on and why you're doing what you're doing. The next is to define the problem, not the symptoms. So to use the 5 whys exercise to dive into the problems a little bit deeper to figure out where you can intervene, and kind of stop setting goals. Maybe have some goals, but don't be so tied to them, and instead tie yourself to your systems. So again, for review, that's systems that are around process as opposed to outcome. So figuring out those small habit changes. That reminder, routine, and reward, those tiny habit changes on top of a process or a system and a way to track will dramatically improve your ability to change your lifestyle, whatever that might look like. If you're interested in learning more about this stuff, I'm working on a 5-week online course called How to Change and Make It Stick, and I would love your feedback about anything I've talked about tonight and what you might think would be valuable. It's going to be a combination of video content and some more worksheets and some good readings, but essentially a way to dive into a lot of this stuff that I haven't gotten to in the last half an hour. You can always connect with me on Facebook, facebook.com/thesugarfixcanada. I post a lot of interesting stuff about sugar particularly. And if you have any questions, I'd love to hear about it on Twitter, or you can email me, jeff@thesugarfix.ca. If I had been using the webinar platform as I had intended, we'd be able to do some live chatting, which we might be able to with Google Hangouts. So if anybody has any thoughts, they can try and chat with me. I will be honest that I haven't used Google Hangouts very much, so that's all I've got. I'm going to stop the screen share and back to my my mug. So yeah, thank you very much for coming out, and I apologize again for the webinar problem that I ran into. I'm going to try and set up another one sometime in the near future, and hopefully it'll work a little bit better than this. But I was glad to be able to spend at least a little bit of time with you guys to go from there. So yeah, thanks again, and have a great night.